One problem that Locke takes very seriously is a kind of objection that he anticipates that would go something like this. Fine, political communities are formed through consent, but nobody actually ever does that. You're just born in a place and and you have to listen to their laws. Nobody actually gives their, or very few people do. And so, I don't know, doesn't that just kind of undermine your project more generally? So it's a problem he takes very seriously. He takes the more general, there's a kind of more general or slightly different problem that he takes very, very seriously. And that problem would focus on the fact that, or the claim, the objection that people have never been in a state of nature, right? And so there was never this state of nature which people were originally in. Then they agreed, and now they're out. And so, doesn't your theory fall apart? Does your theory, is this just like a thought experiment, or do you actually think people have been in the state of nature? In chapter 8, Locke addresses these issues. Indeed, that's what he spends most of his time addressing. We're not going to look at the details of most of that discussion. He tells this big, long history. He talks about where political communities kind of originally came from, and it's long. It's what most of chapter 8 is. What he's doing there is he's trying to show that this is actually how political communities formed. They formed through a kind of consent. And he thinks what he's also showing is that, yeah, people did kind of start off in a state of nature. He thinks that that happened. Hobbes never really faces these difficulties or takes these difficulties particularly seriously. But Hobbes also thinks a state of nature actually existed at some point. They both also think that they both also think that a state of nature exists between countries, between political communities. So yeah, sure, fine. England is its own political community, and within England, there's no state of nature. But between England and France, they stand in a state of nature vis-a-vis one another. Right? Both Hobbes and Locke think that. And so they're both very concerned to show that a state of nature actually happened, that it actually existed, that it's not just some made up thing. And so that's what Hobbes is really concerned with, one of his main concerns in chapter 8. We're not going to focus on the details of how he shows that. You can read it. It's not as philosophically interesting as what we are going to focus on. We're going to focus on that first initial problem. People haven't seemed to consent. So does that mean the political authority isn't legitimate? I've never said I consent. I agree to be a part of the United States of America and whatever, I authorize what the majority decides. Does that mean I'm not a member of the political community? I mean, that would seem strange. It seems I'm clearly a member of the political community, right? And so what's kind of brewing here is an objection, right? Somebody might say, well, look, I might say, let's say I'm objecting to Locke. I might say, I've never done that. I've never, I've never said I agree to be a part of this community. I'm clearly a part of this community, though, and subject to the laws. Therefore, Locke, the story you're telling is false. It's wrong. This isn't where authority comes from, right? Something like that. He addresses this concern by drawing a distinction between two kinds of consent. They are what he calls express consent and tacit consent. Express consent is actually expressing the fact that you agree to join the political community by writing it down or staying it, right? Saying, I agree to join a political community wherein the majority have the right to decide, right to act on behalf of the whole. Or, right, people don't do that nowadays, really. That's not how you join a political community. That's not how you become a citizen or anything like that. You fill out forms. Yeah. Right. So you fill out the appropriate forms, check the appropriate boxes. That would be a kind of express consent. You are actually expressing the fact that you agree to join this community. And so people who become citizens of a new country, of a different country, right, would be doing this. They'd be giving express consent. So someone who was born in wherever, I don't know, what's some country, Micronesia, who flies over to the U.S., emigrates to the U.S., and wants to become a American citizen, they would fill out certain forms. That would be a kind of express consent to join the United States political community. Yeah. Okay, so people who become citizens when they were previously citizens elsewhere, that's express consent. But that's not me. I was born in Michigan. I was born in the United States, yeah, and I never filled out any form or anything like. So I don't know. I haven't given express consent. And so does that mean I'm not a member of the United States political community? No, Locke would say. There's something called tacit consent. And this one's a little bit harder to understand, right? Express consent is like what we would just think of by you agree, you explicitly agree. Tacit consent is going to be where you don't explicitly agree, but nonetheless you somehow agree. Well, how does that work? Locke's description of it: you have tacitly consented by somebody, whatever somebody has tacitly consented and so agree to be a part of this political community by possessing or enjoying any part of the dominions of the government. That's Locke's account. Well, what exactly does that mean? What does he have in mind? The primary thing he has in mind, possessing or enjoying any part of the kind of power authority of the government, enjoying, making use of, finding advantageous the things that the government is doing. And what he has primarily in mind is the owning of land. Land which is under the jurisdiction of the government, right? And so in particular, what he has in mind here is like something like inherited land, because there isn't really just land out there in common anymore. All the land has been claimed, and it's been passed down through inheritance. So his idea is something like this. Let's say I were a 17th century Englishman or whatever, and my father had an estate, the Fisher estate. I don't know how it worked. And then he dies, and I have an older brother, but imagine I didn't have an older brother, and so I inherit the estate. Right? It'd usually go to the firstborn male, but we're assuming that he's not around. I took him out. Now I inherit the land. Okay, great. Locke's idea, even though I was born in England, I was born on my father's estate, and then I inherit it, and I never said I agree to be a part of this political community. Locke's idea is simply by owning the land and enjoying the governmental protection and regulation of it that I do, I have tacitly consented to be a part of this political community. That's Locke's idea, by possessing or enjoying any part of the dominions of the government. And there might be other ways in which you do this, right? In which you might possess or enjoy part of the dominions of government. What are the other ways you want to cash out, right? When you're enjoying the protection of the laws, you're enjoying the authority that the state provides, the protection that it provides. That's tacit consent. You've tacitly consented to be a part of that political community by continuing to own the land, by continuing to enjoy any part of the dominions of the government. Now, he claims that express consent is irrevocable. It's something like, he thinks of it as like a promise. You agree once and for all to be a member of this community, and once you agree to that, no takebacks. You are a part of that community from now until you die. That's irrevocable. It'd be like breaking a promise. It'd be like lying, and that's wrong. And so it's irrevocable. Express consent is. Tacit consent, by contrast, is revocable. Right? So I'm that Englishman who was born in the 17th century, and I inherit my father's estate. I've tacitly consented to be a part of the English political community. I can revoke my consent, Locke would say. Well, how do I do that? Simply by selling the land, by ceasing to enjoy the dominions of the government, right? Selling the land and getting out of there. And then I can go start my own political community. I can go join another political community. I'm not bound to the political community that I was born to or born in, right? That's Locke's idea. And so express consent, it's like a promise. It can't be revoked. Tacit consent, it's not like a promise, right? It's not like that. It can be revoked. But simply by enjoying these things, you kind of give your consent. That's Locke's idea. And so he would want to say the vast majority of people, or the vast majority of people born in any given country will have tacitly consented to be a part of the political community in which they find themselves. And so that's why I am indeed a member of the United States political community, even though I've never said I agree to blah, 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 right? Yeah, all what Locke would say is I have never given express consent, but I've tacitly consented by continuing to possess and or enjoy the dominions of the government.